Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first NZX Deep Insight webinar for 2021. I'm pretty excited today because I'm coming to you with two of my mates, actually, two people that I catch up regularly. We have to remember that we're actually not in a coffee session, so we won't veer off track or from the conversation. But I've got Leanne Marsh from Beef and Lamb and Dana Muir from BNZ. We're going to be talking about sustainable finance and how that ties in with the consumer network. So, first, actually, Leanne, why don't you, one, tell us what your role is at Beef and Lamb, and then two, can you give us a bit of an outline on the emerging trends that you're seeing around consumers and food at the moment?
Yeah, great. And hi, everyone. As Julia said, it's really great to be here with both Donna and Julia. They're both really, really clever people, and we have lots of fun. So yeah, we'll have to try and not get a bit silly. But yeah, hopefully it will be an informative session. So my role at Beef and Lamb, I sit within the market development team. So many of you will have heard about Taste Pure Nature. So that's like our flagship program as part of our market development team. I head up the market innovation, which is kind of one of those nebulous terms that doesn't really mean anything. So I kind of work on numerous different projects. Some of you will have heard about the alternative proteins work that we did a couple of years ago. So I'm sort of here, there, and everywhere looking at where the disruptive shifts can happen and trying to interpret that for Beef and Lamb, and then focusing on some work around that. So I guess in terms of what I'm sort of thinking about and seeing today in terms of sustainable finance, there's probably three things. The first is I'm seeing a real big shift in consumer needs. So particularly these conscious foodie, high value consumers, that's what we call them. That's our target segment for our Taste Pure Nature brand. And these people are increasingly seeking trustworthy supply chains. So what these people want to know is our supply chain both socially and environmentally responsible? And some of you might be aware of the regenerative egg research that Beef and Lamb New Zealand is conducting in partnership with New Zealand Wine and supported by our friends at MPI. A report is due out in a few weeks, I believe, if anyone's waiting for that. One of the themes that we've seen come out from the early findings is on the need to better align financial incentives to support agriculture to move away from the status quo. In some parts of the world, this is about shifting subsidies where a large part of farmer incomes are derived. And these farmers are incentivized on growth and not necessarily on positive environmental impact. And I'll come back to the New Zealand context in a moment. Additionally, many consumers are losing confidence in the global food system. So when you think about the growing distrust of big ag and multinational food companies in places like the US, these companies understand that their reputations are being threatened, and they're looking to reposition their brands in the sustainable diet space. So we've been seeing and hearing a lot about these companies' commitment, particularly around regenerative egg. Obviously, that's an area that we've been looking at specifically, and they're really moving at speed and scale. So for example, on Climate Day in 2019, General Mills committed to advancing regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres of farmland by 2030. And I guess from my perspective, I suspect that greenwashing concerns will grow amongst consumers. And so this is why it's so critical that we have the right metrics and data to provide reassurances that New Zealand produces safe, quality, and socially environmentally ethical foods. So secondly, we're also observing pressure coming onto companies. So I already talked a little bit about their reputations being threatened in terms of those multinationals and big egg companies. And what I've also observed is a growing desire for impact investing. So this is something we're seeing in terms of a generational change. And up until recently, the primary response of business was seen to deliver financial profit to shareholders. But there's now growing evidence that this isn't what shareholders want. We're seeing the rise of what we're calling citizen investors, who are holding companies to account to their values and putting pressure on them to divest of fossil fuels. And food companies are not immune to this. And in the past, it might have been up to the consumer to make the quote unquote right sustainable choice. But now NGOs and governments are putting pressure on companies and financial institutions. And then thirdly, I've highlighted briefly the importance of data and metrics, and there's really a need for New Zealand agriculture to define and prove its sustainability. So there are growing conversations around sustainable agriculture and sustainable diets. And interestingly, what many of those people are seeking is really aligned with New Zealand's grass-fed system. So for us in New Zealand, it's more about substantiating what many New Zealand farmers already do. And so we shouldn't really be seeing this as a threat, but that's how we're sort of seeing it. And in terms of the sheep and beef sector, we can authentically support our claims of sustainable agriculture in numerous ways. So things like having a farm environment plan, the Farm Assurance Plus program. So many of you will have heard about the Farm Assurance program. Farm Assurance Plus is a new program that'll be rolling out in a few months through the New Zealand Farm Assurance Incorporated via processing companies. So it's going to be a voluntary standard. Farmers don't have to sign on to this, but there's a pathway forward for those who do want to pursue or substantiate what they're doing. So I'll stop there. And yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, look, what I heard, I guess, is let's get some measure in place. And I guess what I get questions all the time about ESG, like people are like, is it just a trend? Is it going to go away? And I guess what I'm hearing you say is it's actually evolving. It's not leaving.
Yeah, and I mean, there's kind of multiple things going on anyway. And so farmers, again, I'll just reiterate, many farmers are already doing some of this stuff. It's just that now we need the proof. And so the government's asking for this. So we're going to have to do it anyway. But the cool thing is this is actually what our consumers are wanting. So, you know, we're already getting our ducks in a row so that actually we can provide those assurances to those consumers. Yeah.
So capturing the value, right? So the awesome thing about that is it's for some that won't even need more. It means measuring what you're doing now.
Exactly. Yeah. And if I think about, you know, who we're targeting overseas, we always talk about this, you know, value add, premium, you know, sort of segment, getting the most for what we produce. And those are the people that are thinking about this stuff and do care about it and are actually changing behavior. And it's really interesting because I've got a whole bunch of stats, which I won't bore people with, but there was a study done in 2017 with, I think, the Bank of America that was talking about investors, high net worth individuals in the US. And generationally, we're seeing these younger people saying, I may not get as great a return, but this is so important to me. So again, I think it's not a blip and it's not just a fad. I think this is a longer term generational trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I know in the green bonds in a global sense, there's been sort of a 600% pickup since 2014. You know, so I mean, I'm going to have to read the numbers. Terrible numbers don't sit in my head very well, but you know, we're talking about US dollars 269 billion, and that's just in green bonds. So that's not looking at ESG funds. That's not looking at this sort of investment. That's so it's here to stay.
I think so. Yeah. And you know what? We're in a great position. So again, I'll just reiterate the point. A lot of what these, you know, people are looking for is kind of the grass-fed system that we have in New Zealand. So, you know, it's not kind of new news to us. It's just that we can't say, just trust us.
Yeah. And look, all credit to Beef and Lamb, all credit to the likes of BNZ as well, because these are brave things to have started talking about back in the day. Before it was, and I say this a lot, but before it was cool, and before everyone was on board. And these were, you know, I guess, seemed like a bit woo-woo type of topics to be talking about. And all credit to both organisations for actually having the courage to come out loudly and talk about them and actually lead your members and your customers so that they can be prepared for it, so that there's not a blunt object that comes in because it's, you know, both organisations have been really open and talking about it for a long time. So now, Dana, we all want to know the details of the sustainable loan. So tell us, what's your role, which I'm sure most people should know already, but what's your role, and talk us through the sustainable finance loan.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, guys. So I'm Dana Muir. So I head up our natural capital team at BNZ, which is a very fancy way of saying basically my job is to look at macro and micro trends around the future of agribusiness, which normally 9 times out of 10 is around sustainability or environmental, social and governance factors, and evaluate how the bank can be best supporting our farmers that bank with us and making sure that we're really partnering with them to make sure that they've got long-term environmentally and financially sustainable businesses. And, you know, we recognise that we've got a really key role to play in building a really sustainable future for New Zealand agri, and we take a lot of our steer from, actually, you know, we can say that BNZ has been brave in talking about this, but actually it's what our farmers have been telling us for a really long time. They're doing some amazing things, and it's actually BNZ just really want to partner with them and take that, I suppose, to the next level. If we look at what we're seeing in the financial sector globally, as you touched on, Julia, you know, that ESG credentials are becoming a very popular thing to be showing when you're looking at which companies or which funds to be investing in, and they are growing rapidly. We are watching with interest around what's happening in the sustainable finance markets more broadly. Certainly out of Europe, we're seeing a lot of traction in this space, and what we're seeing actually is frameworks starting to emerge where we used to see it very much in sectors that had a social license to operate issue, such as infrastructure or energy. We're now seeing that start to show up in agriculture as well. And New Zealand farmers have been tackling this issue of social license to operate for some time now. So I think we're all very au fait with that term. Where the finance sector has realised that we can play a role is in defining what sustainable finance is within those sectors, and then coming up with tools to actually support that transition that those farmers or those sectors are working on. In Europe, agriculture specifically, we've seen two major frameworks emerge around what is sustainable agriculture for the finance sector. In New Zealand, we realised that we've got a pretty unique set of skills and farming practices that are very different from the rest of the world, and we really want to make sure that we acknowledge that from a finance sector point of view. If we're going to bring out any type of tool to support farmers as they go through this process, we want to make sure it's very New Zealand centric and very aligned with the great work that the likes of Beef and Lamb are doing around bringing out their own certifications, such as the Farm Assurance Plus program that acknowledges the hard work that farmers are putting in to make their businesses more sustainable. So we've actually all got together as all of the banks with a bunch of others and actually created off the back of those international frameworks our own framework that will emerge in the next couple of months, and you'll hear a lot more about that in the next few months. But we've gone out to all of the stakeholders such as Beef and Lamb and Dairy NZ and said, does this line up with the certifications that you're putting into the market, that you're trialing with farmers? And usually the answer is yes. So basically the place that we've got to or are getting to is that we'll have a New Zealand sustainable finance framework that lines up with the global frameworks. So international investors or international consumers can go, what does sustainable agriculture look like in New Zealand? And we can show them what we're doing. And hopefully that adds to that traceability story, and we say, yes, we're very aligned with what's happening globally, except we've just got a New Zealand flavour to it, which is really important, obviously. So in a BNZ context, what we've done is we've seen a real opportunity here actually to partner with our farmers and say to them, hey, if you're doing some really great stuff around improving your environmental, social and governance factors within your agribusiness, we think that that is going to create a really great long-term business. It's going to support when we take a look at our portfolio and we start to look at risk and things like that the banks like to do. We can say, hey, look, actually these farmers participated in some form of sustainable finance, and so we are very aware of the values and the goals that drive the strategies within that business, which we think is really important. So what we've launched sorry, cutting a long story short, is we've launched a sustainably linked loan, which is one form of the many different forms of sustainable finance that are available. But what we like about a sustainability linked loan for the agri sector is it means that we can really link into some tangible goals that those farmers are putting in place within their business. So it's about over and above minimum compliance, which we think is also really important. We'll help farmers get to compliance, and I know that that's a major issue, but this is about highlighting those top farmers that are really going above and beyond to create really, really sustainable businesses, really start to think about what they want that land to look like and how they want that land to operate in the next 20 years time, and actually say to them, okay, if you can come up with a couple of key goals and we agree that they're ambitious and measurable and really tailored to your business, then we will directly link that to your cost of lending throughout the term of your loan. So we actually partnered with a dairy group called Southern Pastures, and they are pretty exceptional in terms of how they run their and outline their environmental, social and governance targets and goals within their business to the public. and really quite transparent about what they want to achieve in their business. They're also the owner of Lewis Road Creamery, so they're certainly starting to think along those lines that Leanne and I will touch on in terms of how does the finance sector supporting that traceability story and that sustainability story start to play into what is a sustainable food in the market. So they're starting to think along those lines as well, which was really exciting. We partnered with them and we said to them, okay, if you can come up with 3 targets, and the targets that they chose were around improving their water quality, reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and improving their biodiversity across their farms. And we partnered with them on a 3-year, $50 million syndicated loan. And basically how it works is that they have progress goals towards achieving overall goals around those key metrics. And if they achieve those goals, then there is a pricing incentive directly linked to those. So we think it's really exciting, actually. I think we think about it as it's adding to the toolbox of really great frameworks and tools that are available to help our farmers as they go about tackling some of these issues within their business. And we're saying to them, look, if you are achieving some pretty awesome stuff, which we know a lot of our farmers are, we're saying we recognise that that's actually going to create a long-term, really robust agribusiness. And so we want to reward you for all of the work that you're putting in.
That's awesome. So those three targets that have been chosen, they have to hit all, or is it linked to each individual one, or is it 3 or nothing kind of thing?
Yeah, so there's a direct, basically we allocate the pricing evenly across all of the targets.
Oh, cool.
We don't think that social factors or environmental factors are more important than the other. We think they're all very important. And basically they've got the ability to meet progress targets along the way and reach an overall target. And if they fail those targets, I mean, look, I think speaking out of turn, but Southern Pastures will work really hard to achieve those targets. But yeah, look, there is an ability that they may fail.
Yeah, cool. Now, I mean, I read their ESG report on the weekend, and they are very transparent, and I think that's, I guess what worries me about New Zealand, and I'd probably be interested in both your views, is we think that we can only be transparent when we're good. And I actually learnt this term off Leanne a while ago, was it's authenticity over perfection, or versus perfection. And we're never going to get perfect because we're not pushing ourselves hard enough if we do. But we want to be authentic. So, and I noticed what I loved about Southern Pastures ESG report is they were open about things that might not be popular, like bobby calves, etc. It's very public information. You can Google it, it's there. And I think that's very brave. And I think the more we can actually be open, the less people try to make stuff up, like it just sort of shuts the door a lot on when there's information missing, there's a bit of a gap. But when you give everyone everything, then, and it's measure, they've got measures. They've actually talked about values and measures, so
I think, sorry, Leanne, I totally agree. And I think that this is where we see a huge opportunity for the finance sector actually to go, we agree with, the work that Beef and Lamb and Synlait and Fonterra are putting in to measure and report and manage and mitigate a lot of these factors. And I look at it as the finance sector has been a missing piece to this traceability story that we're trying to tell to the market, and actually us coming on board is quite exciting, and aligning with those European standards and those international frameworks has been really important, so that we've got a bit of continuity when we enter the market. We're not just saying New Zealand thinks we're really sustainable. We're actually saying, compared to the rest of the world, this is how sustainable we are. And you can kind of show that because it's, it flows through.
Well, sorry, Emily, what were you going to add?
Oh yeah, what I would also add is, I mean, I think there's 2 things to what you said about that whole authenticity piece and not, waiting until we're perfect. I think one is, I've got a brand marketing background and I've worked in consumer insights for numerous years. And, when you think about reputation is almost like, what's your personality? Like, how do you want, if you were a person, how do you want people to think about you? And I guess what I love about Beef and Lamb is one of our key values is fronting up. And so for me, when it comes to the sustainability space, it can feel quite scary, but I think what people are looking for is almost for us to front up and acknowledge that, yes, you know, there are some things that need to be addressed, and this is what we're doing to work on them. But it's also an opportunity for us to talk about what we have done and the progress we have made. And so it really is about opening up that conversation. So I think there is a lot of concern that, you know, we have to really protect what we're sort of sharing, but I feel like it's a missed opportunity, because people just want to know we're authentic and we're real, and they don't expect perfection. So I think we almost have to sort of put that to the side. But obviously, you know, I understand that it feels quite real when something goes out in the media and then there's a huge, you know, backlash and conversation around it.
Yeah, and that is a hard one. I mean, I think it's also though about, and I'm not, you know, for anyone who listening may not understand ESG, it's environment, social governance, and I think what people forget too is under those banners, there's 3 banners there, and below those, are just multiple topics. You know, it's a platform for multiple conversations. It's kind of one size fits one, and I think when we try and jam something into a box, that's when we get into strife. And you know, I guess this, what I heard you say too, Dana, is your metrics can change with the business's goals.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we were really conscious as we went through the structuring process that we had to build a product that recognized biological systems, and they change over time, and we needed to make sure that finance and science were starting to link in together there. And we also needed to make sure that it's actually about the business's specific goals. So if they're really hot on social goals and making sure that their staff are really well taken care of, and they really want to improve their animal welfare credentials and things like that, then by all means choose some social goals. And in the same breath, there's, you know, there's a plethora of environmental goals that any one of our dairy, dry stock, hort, arable farmers could be choosing, and that they're working to achieve in their business. So we needed to make sure that it was very tailored to each individual business.
Yeah, that's awesome, which makes a difference, right? Because I think if we try and jam everyone into, what is it Einstein had, if you want to ask a fish to climb a tree, it will always fail. I'm sure he said it way better, and I don't think that's actually what he said, but that's the context. And so I think in this way we're able to capture the value. And back to both of your points, this is actually about recognizing achievement. And I know that over the years with all these conversations, there has been some frustration with those really good performers and high achievers. And please, whoever's listening, don't get upset. We're not saying that everyone else is low achievers. It's just there's different levels and different stages of progression. But there is a frustration when you can't actually, I guess, get a level of acknowledgement or reward from it. And you know, but all these systems are looking at that and then capturing that value. And also what I heard both of you say was making it New Zealand centric, but having a global language so the rest of the world actually understands our value. Because I honestly don't think we are as good as we think we are at actually promoting the great stuff that we do. I think we're very good at finding what isn't quite right and having a little pick, but we probably can, you know, these things provide measure and metrics and ability to go see this is actually how good we are. So now I have got a couple of questions, so I'm just gonna, and please anyone listening, crank out questions as much as you like. As we all do this hard work to make value added products for the new generation of ESG conscious consumers and increase the demand of our produce in general, how do we balance an increased international demand and value for our products while keeping them financially accessible to the New Zealand consumer market? That's a tough one. Leanne, would you like to start?
Well, I think there's a couple points of view. I might have a beef and lamb point of view, and I might have a slightly, you know, different point of view. So I think number one, you know, we're really lucky in New Zealand that we produce way more food than we can ever consume. And so that's actually a really important way that we, you know, can afford, you know, the healthcare services and the transport and the schools and the quality services. So, you know, I think we want to get top dollar for what we produce. We want to send it to where people value it and will pay more for it, because it means more prosperity for New Zealand. I think it is a bit of a balance, because we don't want our own products, which we believe, you know, are high quality and great, you know, and nutritious and all that stuff, to be out of, you know, the reach of the everyday New Zealander. And so I think it is a challenging place to be. And I mean, without getting into sort of theories and, you know, different ways of looking at the world, you know, it is food is one of those ones where it's been completely privatized, which I find really interesting. You know, things like education, you know, those are things that we think are a public good. So I don't know where the conversations will go, but I just wonder if there might be questions that are starting to be asked about, you know, is food potentially a public good, considering how much we spend on sort of treatment of, you know, diet-related diseases. So kind of two perspectives there, but yeah, it's a tricky one.
Dana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's an easy one. No, look, I think that that's a huge question, which I'm probably not best to answer. That's really Leanne's jam. But what I do think is that there are lots of elements here where there's massive opportunity. So there's opportunity for us to look at our efficiencies of our farming systems and you know, consider the costs of production that are going in at the moment. And there's also a lot of opportunity at the market end for us to derive some premiums for the increased sustainability credentials that we're getting across in our products. And I know that a lot of our processing groups are starting to look really heavily at how they can derive those premiums from the additional work and the additional effort that farmers are putting into improving those credentials within the products that they produce. So I think that's a really exciting space to watch as well, in terms of the way that we'll be able to flow those premiums back to farmers, and then hopefully, if we're driving those premiums at an international level, hopefully that can continue to keep food prices reasonable within a New Zealand context.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I know Ian Proudfoot's big on, you know, we've got to have feeding our own as part of our global food story. You know, I think we're the third fattest country, second fattest children country, and I think that in itself, you know, the critical illness factor and the side of it. So I guess there's no, I guess the big answer is there's really no answer right now. But we've probably got to get more focus, and as you say, Leanne, it can't all be, you know, private sector. It's actually got to be a really good mix to make sure that we are getting good food into people, that it is affordable. Nutrition is important. You know, it's linked to multiple things. It's linked to good mental health. It's linked to ability to learn. It's linked to these things. And I think when you live in a country where we produce, and you might know the stats better, I think it's 10 times the amount of food that we require, there's got to be something in the system that allows some leeway. But in saying that, I do want to acknowledge the likes of Fair Grow, who are actually getting vegetables and fruits and things into into those who may not have access to that food. Meet the need, personal thing there because I'm on the board, but again, getting nutrition into the food banks, but at the same time we've got to make sure people actually know what to do with it and understand how to have the nutrition. So there's a big story in that. Now I have got more questions coming in, which is fabulous. I am actually grappling with the technology of, it's been a few months and I've forgotten how to use it. Dana, how are you working with those farmers who drag the chain over change versus those who are setting targets you spoke to and getting rewarded with their lending? Just easy questions today.
That's a really good question, and it's something that we grappled with a lot in terms of, do we understand that there are farmers that are dragging the chain that need to lift to compliance, and so that's going to be a case-by-case basis, but that's very much about the bank managing its risk at the bottom end of town, right? So I mean, if we think about it from a New Zealand Inc and a New Zealand Agri point of view, we don't want to see those sorts of farming practices anymore. We've all moved on, I think, a really long way from that, and I know I speak to a lot of farmers who get really frustrated by that poor media from those farmers that are dragging the chain. So we'll work with them on a one-to-one basis in terms of managing how they get up to compliance and how they get up to minimum standard. We don't want to see that. But then at the other end of town, what we think is really exciting is actually, we work with those farmers who are exemplary and they're really showing to New Zealand and to the world the types of farming systems and the types of practices that we really strive to achieve, and that's really exciting. We're talking a really great sustainability and social and cultural and governance story on some of these farms, and we want to really showcase that and say, hey, we've partnered with these farmers to achieve some really great goals in their business because we agree that that is a really great thing for for the climate, for New Zealand, for that traceability story, for the longevity of using that land in the particular way that they're using it. So we see that that's a real opportunity, and we hope that, you know, by partnering with those leaders, we'll also start to incentivize, you know, that next portion of our farming community to really strive towards achieving some of those goals. And you're seeing it's not, I really look at this as it's no different to some of those really great programs that are starting to emerge, like the Lead with Pride program, or again, coming back to, you know, the FAP Plus program. Those sorts of initiatives are there to sort of drive, you know, showcase what is best practice and what is continuous excellence and continuous improvement, and try to bring a lot of people on that journey with them. So we're really hoping that this will start to lift the agri community up as well.
So rather than chasing everyone with a stick, it's more around, hey, look, here's some examples. And look, I think we forget sometimes too how overwhelming these things are. And even in a corporate company concept, these things can be very overwhelming when you haven't started, but the best thing to do is to start, you know, is to do something. And I guess if you've got exemplars that you can say, hey, we don't expect you to be like this, but you know what, they actually get what it was like to be 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's, I guess, when we can actually look forward and see what people have done, it does create a better pathway for us. Liam, what about as far as, say, the industry body space, or, you know, I mean, because from my perspective, I think everyone works really hard in this space to support those who are, I guess, dragging the chain. Sometimes they might be the loudest voices, so we think there's more of them than there are, or that's just the greatest focus. But, you know, from your perspective, how do you guys deal with it?
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think the last time I was speaking out in the field, I was in a wool shed, which I absolutely love. When I get my gum boots on, I'm actually speaking with farmers. And, you know, I often get that question, what are you guys doing about these low performers? You know, they're really bringing us all down. So I think there is a real sense of frustration around that. And there really isn't tolerance. And so, you know, there is an opportunity for other farmers to call farmers out. And I think what's also really frustrating in terms of like the sector is that, you know, our reputation, people will think that the lowest performing farmers are actually the status quo. And anytime we have like a farmer who's doing some amazing things, media every time will say, oh, you're just one farmer. They've rolled out like the really top farmer. And so, you know, we really just need to, I come back to the whole idea of substantiating and, you know, really finding ways that we can prove it. Because I know a lot of farmers are doing amazing things on their farm. And that they're working towards some of these, you know, really aspirational goals. But it's almost like we really have to start proving that. We can't, you know, because or else it becomes very hard to quantify that and to say, no, those low performing farmers are literally 0.02% of, you know, the sheep and beef sector or the dairy sector, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's a bit of a New Zealand thing at the moment, isn't it? We've got these lovely sweeping statements, everybody, all of them, everyone, you know, we don't kind of sit back and realize there are actually, our beautiful team of 5 million are a bunch of individuals. And so there's lots of different things happening, and there are some that are excelling and some may not be, that need some help. But I guess if we get out the blame stick and keep bashing everyone, there's not a lot of motivation to support people.
Yeah, and I would also add, I mean, a lot of the work that Beef and Lamb does is really trying to develop the tools and the resources to enable farmers to get started, because I think that's half of the challenge for farmers. It feels overwhelming. Oh gosh, there's so many things to do. And it's really providing, again, the support and the tools to go, well, where can you get started? So, you know, Beef and Lamb doing the farm planning, for example, and looking how we, you know, partner with others in the sector to, you know, roll that out, you know, as wide as possible. So again, it is about providing farmers with the tools and the confidence that actually, you know, it's not as probably as difficult as it may seem. And, you know, we know farmers have got a lot to do already. So, you know, it can feel like just another piece of paper that they have to fill out, usually with the same questions that they filled out about 10 times before. So,
look, yeah, I think I'd add to that, sorry, Julia, that if I was a farmer right now, I would be quite excited actually about what is happening in the sector right now. I think, you know, there are so many tools in the toolbox at this point, and more that are emerging that are there to support the transition where need be, and also to verify the great work that is going on farm, and actually to tell that story to the markets that we need to tell that story to, but in ways that it's verified and it's traceable. And I think we've been having this conversation for a really long time within the sector, but we're actually starting to see some real tangible action, and it's really, really exciting. So if I was a farmer, I would feel, look, quite pleased at how the community around farming is really trying to build some really great tools to support that traceability story and to tell that story better, and to help where need be in terms of knowing your numbers and things like that.
And I mean, how cool would it be in a perfect world if we ended up with the metrics that you need, the same that the processor needs, you know, same that the consumer might be looking for, Leanne, and we've got not one set of metrics, that's like a little bit too idealistic even for me, but at least similar metrics, so we're not doubling up, because what farmers don't need is more on the to-do list. And I think if there can be some sort of connection.
And yeah, I believe that's what the Farm Assurance Program does, is that in the past, you know, processing companies have had different programs pretty much with the same things, but it was dependent often on their customer requirements, where the FAP is really about bringing them all together under one umbrella and then having one sort of audit process. So it is about streamlining and making that so much easier. And yeah, just being able to, again, tell that story. So when I think about Taste Pure Nature, and Donna talks about being able to tell that story overseas, it's underpinned by the Farm Assurance Program, which is why it's so vitally important that we get our farmers onto Farm Assurance. And then obviously we'll be rolling out the Farm Assurance Plus for those who want to continue on that journey and substantiate some of the great stuff that they're doing.
And then it gives the banks the opportunity to say, okay, that metric fits with us, so we can use that too. And all of a sudden we're killing a whole lot of birds with one stone, as opposed to repeating the same thing in a different language.
Exactly, that's right.
So now we've got one cool comment here from Lindy. For anyone who doesn't know, who get to know her, she founded the AWDT, or Agribusiness Development Trust, and 4 years ago had actually started with programs talking about ESG frameworks for farmers. So she makes a great point. This isn't new, and many more know about it. Just to your point, Dana, I think it was hard to link it into your funding or other programs, and this is the beauty now of this, I guess, fantastic collision of finance with farm plans, etc., where we can actually get these things working together for the good of what the consumer wants, to make sure that we can keep getting product out the door. Now we have got another cool question. Bear with, it's a good one, but I want to read it. It's, what is the New Zealand investors' demand for sustainable financing in the agricultural sector compared to international demand? Is this demand, whether local or international, driving a dramatic increase in demand for financing structures, such as sustainability-linked loans, or do you feel it is still a niche for the time being? And there's another question, but we'll deal with that one first and go to the second part after.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, I mean, look, certainly since COVID, and Julia, in your work with NZX, you'll be able to share some tangible examples of this, but we are seeing a dramatic uptake in investments into businesses and funds that have higher ESG credentials. And so one form of funding for that, there's a plethora, but like green bonds and things like that, but sustainability linked loans are certainly one of the tools that are emerging across the board. And you're starting to see some really big dairy companies around the world starting to link their invest in sustainability linked loans. We saw late last year, Synlait did the first agribusiness processing company sustainability linked loan, and so that meant that they'll be looking throughout their supply chain at different areas that they can improve those ESG credentials. So we see this as really exciting for the agri space as well, but certainly for the agri sector, it is in its infancy. We think that once this SAFI framework emerges in the next couple of months, we will start to see a lot more movement towards this space. But we were really conscious when we released the sustainability linked loan that this was the first, and this was the first time that a farmer has linked their interest rates to some really tangible, direct ESG targets within their business. So it is really in its infancy within agribusiness, but we see it's a really exciting sector going forward.
I have a question. Sorry, I know you had a second part to that question, Julia. Donna, one of the concerns that some of our farmers have been raising is around these sustainability linked loans and whether they'll be required in future, and if so, when and how fast is that going to be required? So this is generally a really big fear that exists, so I'd be curious to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, cool. And look, that's actually really helpful, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Look, as far as BNZ goes, this is definitely a product that will not be for everyone. And I think for the integrity of the product, you probably don't want it to be for every farmer either. You want this, farmers can opt in or opt out of this. We'll always have our general financial products that we've always offered. This will just be another string to that bow. So if you really want your financial sector to partner with you as you go through some of these steps, then this is the product for you. But if not, there are lots of different options available. We, as part of our internal credit processes, we have started to add in environmental factors. So we've always rated customers based on their non-financial and their financial management. And as part of that non-financial management, we've now added in some questions around how they manage their environment and things like that. So we have started to integrate that into our processes anyway. So you will start to see more and more a part of your interest rate is driven by how you manage your environment anyway, because we do see that as a risk, and we also see that as a big opportunity to create long-term sustainable businesses and land use and things like that. But yeah, look, this will not be something that we tell farmers that they need to get on board with. It is certainly optional, but we think it's an exciting option.
Yeah, and I think the key there is that, often when I've been speaking with farmers is that when there's these new programs that get branded and stuff, they go, oh, so if I'm not part of that, I'm not sustainable. And so there's generally like a sense of, disappointment or unfairness. And so I guess, what I'm hearing from you is that, it's kind of these really big aspirational things, which maybe in 30, 40, 50 years will be kind of the norm. But it doesn't mean that if you're not part of that, that you're not sustainable and you're not doing amazing things. It's just that, there's different ways that different businesses like BNZ are looking at to manage their longer term risk or, to really support some of those businesses in different ways. So yeah, it's good to know.
It's about choices. I think we've got to make sure that people have choices. Like, we can't carbon copy everyone, right? And I think, there's basic principles. So we want the social system to be better, and we want the environment to be better, and we want really well-run businesses. As far as an NZX perspective, it's certainly not a niche and it's not a fad. There is only so much. We've got lots of capital in New Zealand, but remember, we can't invest all our capital in New Zealand. As a country, our capital, we need to get capital from offshore. We need some of our capital to go offshore so that there's a balance of risk. But offshore investors, like there's activists going into AGMs and not in New Zealand, but remember, we've got people offshore investing in New Zealand and not in a negative way. We're not selling New Zealand, so nobody send me a complaint letter about that. It's literally about the investment community, asset managers, fund managers that are helping liquidity so we can do these things within our business that are coming in from offshore. And, there are activist fund managers that will only actually, invest, or they'll drive companies to do better things. They'll take a big chunk of money and invest in the company, and then they'll sit at the AGM and vote off the board and get people on that they want. There are the general activists, and then we've got activist shareholders that will go in and actually invest in a business. So there's all these things that are happening. So it's definitely not a niche. But I will get to the second part of the question: is do farmers feel this type of financing structure is helpful to their business, or not useful, or too much work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that comes back to, again, that point that we realise that this won't be the type of product that everyone wants to get on board with. But for those farmers that really want to verify out, the goals that they're achieving in their business, then this will be. And a lot of those farmers will already be a part of other accreditation systems that will transfer over. And if you're getting it audited once, that's we can use that data as well to verify the goals that we've set with you. So it would be just, instead of having to do 2 audits, for instance, you could just roll that into one. So those sorts of initiatives have been worked through in terms of, like, we don't want to add more paperwork to this. The feedback I've had from the market so far, though, is that this is really exciting. This is a really innovative product that we knew that the market needed some time to warm to, because it is really new for the agriculture sector. It's not new, as you say, Julia, from, if we look at the energy sector or the infrastructure sector, and there has always been a really big opportunity for this to roll into agri. And so we've taken that opportunity, and I think it takes, a brave bank and some really brave customers to start this off, and then we'll see where it goes. But from what I hear from the market, a lot of farmers out there are waiting for it.
Awesome. Now we got this question in early, but it's about the exotic forest. So is exotic forest carbon farming with no plan to harvest eligible for this type of sustainable finance?
Yes, it is, except for technically it doesn't fall into agri, but it is sustainable finance. So if you can prove, if it meets those sustainable forestry criteria, then yes, it would be sort of created, the financing product would be slightly different, but sustainable finance in general.
Cool. And Leanne, I'm going to throw this one at you because it's another really easy one. Globally, what are the largest publicly announced sustainable commitments made by retail or wholesale food companies? And I think you mentioned a few in your intro.
Yeah, well, actually, Donna had a number of examples. We were talking about this the other day, so she might want to list off her spiel. But I guess, in terms of that regenerative egg project, I think there is probably going to be, who's actually talking about it, who's making commitments to it. So without kind of getting into specifics, because I don't have the report in front of me right now, there's definitely a movement towards that. And again, looking for the financial incentives to link up and align to help drive some of that on-farm behavior and to enable some of those big companies. But Donna, you might want to talk about a lot of the carbon zero sort of commitments that quite a few multinational companies are making. And I guess one of the other things that we're starting to see is that it's likely that carbon claims are going to start to be quite a big thing, like on pack. So I know within the sheep, the red meat sector, there are companies that are looking at that already. And it is always a tricky one because, again, how does New Zealand define that, and how do we sort of tell our story? So anyway, I could talk about that for ages, but I might just give that over to Donna to talk about.
Cool. Look, there is a list, and it's quite long and it's growing. We're seeing major food and beverage companies like Coca-Cola and Unilever, and there's an example where the UK supermarket Waitrose has said it will only buy meat, dairy and other food products from net zero carbon farms in the UK by 2035. So you're going to start to see a lot more of this roll out internationally. So if our wholesale and our retail arms are starting to demand that food, if they want it to be on the shelf in the UK, needs to be net zero, we're really going to start to see that flow throughout the supply chain back to farmers. And I don't think that we should fear this. I think we should look at this as a real opportunity, again, to prove out, the efficiencies of the way that we produce food, to prove out, the steps that we're taking to be sustainable businesses. So I think we should look at that as a really exciting piece of work that's happening globally.
I've heard anecdotally too. Oh, sorry, you go, Leanne, you go.
I would add to that, carbon is kind of the hot topic today. It'll be something else tomorrow. So biodiversity, water. So this is just kind of one thing that's sort of hot topic at the moment. So I expect that we'll start to see more on it. But, we have to look at the whole picture holistically. So I think we can easily get caught up in, carbon. And it is quite interesting because the one thing I will say is we've been doing some work to try and understand what is the New Zealand's red meat sector's sustainability story, and how do we really articulate that as an evolution of the Taste Pure Nature brand. And where we're sort of getting to kind of early days is that we're sort of a bit of an all-rounder. Like you can't say that New Zealand is like the most like carbon, like friendly going. And if you did, you'd probably be producing something in a factory, and growing everything on site. So, we've got livestock. And so you kind of have to go, well, actually, that's only one piece of being sustainable. And you really have to look at the holistic picture. So if you want to be the most carbon friendly, you might screw over some other things, right, around biodiversity, etc. So it is really about, looking at that context. So we're not naive to that. So that's probably just one thing I would say is that that's carbon's a big thing at the moment, but we have to keep it in mind of, what are our values and what are we trying to achieve and what's our purpose. So we've got our mind to that as well.
Oh, cool. Now we've got one last question. Dana, what is or could a bank's role in sustainable finance or sustainable journey other than just interest rate differentiation?
There's actually a few. So I think, are they referring to different forms of sustainable finance, or?
No, I think they mean, you know, other than just interest rates, what other levers could you pull?
Oh yeah, look, I mean, there's many, and I think the interest rate space is the most exciting. But I mean, look, you can talk in terms of, so it's cost of capital, or it's access to capital, or you know, the risk element of that as well. So there are plenty of elements here that we can start to utilize. We're looking mainly at, you know, that cost of capital piece at the moment.
Yep. And I guess people need to remember too that a bank is a bank, and I don't mean that rudely. I think sometimes people sort of see it as something else, and the main lever you have, or the main controller, is in fact that cost of capital. It's, you know, or not giving capital at all, or the cost of capital once someone has it. So it's actually quite an important way, I guess, to provide a reward slash incentive to move faster type approach.
Yeah, and like, again, I think I'll just reiterate that this is about supporting and partnering with our farmers as they work towards continuous improvement, towards continuous excellence, and it's going to be an ongoing journey. But you know, what we're really focused on is partnering with our farmers to get there. This isn't about naming and shaming and saying that's bad and that's good. This is about saying, look, we agree that you guys are doing some really great work in your business to become a more sustainable, more financially and environmentally sustainable business. And we want to partner with you as you go about doing that. And I think that's what's really important.
And then we've got the work from the likes of Leanne at Beef and Lamb, where they can actually go out and say, this is what good looks like. Because I think, again, what does socially acceptable mean? What does environmentally sound mean? What is it? And I think when you can get metrics and you can actually have the likes of the awesome work you're doing around consumer, because I truly believe you cannot help producers if you don't understand the consumer. It doesn't matter how good your science is if you don't understand what's happening. You need to understand what the consumer is thinking and talking about and desiring to bring it back into that producer space. Now look, I feel like I've held you up. Last comments, last bursts of wisdom.
Oh my gosh, I don't know if I have any, but other than I agree with Donna that, you know, it is really exciting, and you know, it's so great to see, you know, BNZ, you know, partnering with businesses, and I think we will see more of this. And I guess, you know, the comment that I have is, you know, for farmers, there are tools and there are ways to do this. And so, you know, Beef and Lamb is looking at ways to partner with all these different organizations. So we're basically, you know, we've got farmers' backs, and, you know, we're really trying to do the work in the markets to understand what farmers should be investing in and putting their time in, so they don't feel like they're doing something for nothing. So yeah, and then the last thing I would say is I forgot how fast we all talk. We probably did about 2 hours worth in that hour, so thanks.
My parting words would be, look, we're a really innovative sector. We always have been. That's what we pride ourselves on. Growing up on a dairy farm, I certainly saw just a lot of pride in the fact that we can innovate really well, you know. So I think this is exactly the same. We're putting lots of tools in front of farmers to help them know their numbers, to help them think about their efficiencies, to be really excited actually about what the next 20 years looks like for their businesses. And so I think, yeah, as Leanne said, as I said before, be really excited about what this phase of agriculture is going to produce for the New Zealand agri sector.
That is, yeah, and hey, look, from our perspective, we want to help New Zealand understand how this all ties together with investors and what's happening offshore. So, you know, look, I think everyone's doing their bit, and I think what I'd love everyone to know is there's not just us three either. It's, you know, there's actually a mecca of people out there trying really hard to find solutions and get people on the right track. You got to start somewhere, right? We've got to do shit, like just get on and do things. It's a lot harder to start late in the game than it is to start now. I've got one comment that was awesome that we've got, and I hope nobody's offended by it, but it's somebody put a comment saying, why don't we have more people like Leanne and Dana, I agree, representing companies instead of so many bland, fat, old, rich, white guys. So thank you, that's lovely. So I think what they were trying to say is, isn't it great to have different people and people of difference out there talking. So thank you for that lovely comment, who put that. And thanks for tuning in today. And thank you so much, Dana and Leanne, and the lemonades are on me next time we catch up.
Fab. Thanks, ladies. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.